Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. I am your host, Lonnie Jones. My wife Jackie and I moved to the city of Huntsville in 1986 for me to be a youth and family minister. I have been a minister since 1980. I have served in this community as a police chaplain assigned to a SWAT team since 1992, and I've been in private practice as a licensed professional counselor since 1998. I'm also an adventure educator and an avid outdoorsman. I dabble in rock climbing and I goof around with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Our life has been full of many wonderful experiences and some just outright adventures. I used to write about those things in a little church bulletin article. So now instead of asking you to read those things, we're just going to talk about them in our podcast. And as we talk about them, we're going to talk about the facts. The facts lead to concepts, and the concepts lead to application. One caveat about the facts is, for the most part, we're going to tell you the facts just as they happened. But every now and then, we're going to tell you the way other people have told us they remember it happening with a little bit of embellishment. It's all good, clean fun and for educational purposes. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy Keeping Up with Jones. Faulkner University announces a 60% tuition discount for members of the Church of Christ. Now, there are some guidelines. This 60% tuition reduction is applicable to adult undergraduate Bible degrees or graduate Bible degrees from the Curley Graduate School of Theology in the VP Black College of Biblical Studies. You must satisfy all admission requirements and maintain satisfactory academic progress. You must remain continuously enrolled, including summers, until the completion of the degree. You must provide a letter from an elder or minister, preferably on church letterhead, verifying that you're an active member of a Church of Christ congregation prior to your initial enrollment. This offer applies to adult undergraduate degrees such as biblical studies, youth and family ministry tracks, and it also includes graduate degrees. And those are the Master of Arts in Biblical Studies, the Master of Arts in Family Life Ministry, or a Master of Theology, and it also applies to the PhD in Biblical Studies. For undergraduate inquiries, please contact Adult Enrollment, 334-386-7140, 334-386-7140, or Adult Enrollment at Faulkner edu. That is Adult Enrollment at faulkner.edu. For graduate inquiries, please call 334-386-7539, 334-386-7539. Graduate enrollment at faulkner.edu. That is graduate enrollment at faulkner.edu. Faulkner University is a sponsor of Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. TKM Incorporated in Moss, Tennessee is a construction company that specializes in erosion control, seeding, and soil, hydroseeding, hydromulch, minor excavation, and silt fence. They also provide traffic control and construction signs. Their business is keeping people safe, but their passion, their mission, is they wish that all men could be saved. TKM has adopted the nickname the King's Men because as they serve you, they also serve the King. If they could provide any of their services for you, please contact them at 931-243-3958. That is 931-243-3958. Or you can contact them on the net at tkminc2001 at twlakes.net. That is tkminc2001 at twlakes.net. TKM Incorporated is a sponsor of Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. I couldn't reach it. That may be the story of my climbing life. The section of rock that's the most difficult is called the crux of the climb. It's the make or break point. And many of my problems as a climber are because of my lack of skill, and my lack of skill is exacerbated by my lack of height, or my lack of height is exacerbated by my lack of skill. I'm not a good climber. I mean, I've always enjoyed climbing, but in the real world of climbing, I'm not very good. Uh, eh, because of that, my lack of height might be a factor, and not my lack of height, but my lack of skill. And by lack of skill, I mean gymnastic flexibility and that invisible quality of being able to hang all your weight on one point in one direction so that you're only fighting gravity on one plane or only being pulled in one direction. Now, if you don't understand that, get on the Google machine and search the interweb and look for something called bouldering, and you'll be amazed at what these young people can do. There are 13-year-olds who are doing gymnastic moves on rocks no higher than 20 feet off the ground, and they are more difficult than anything I've ever climbed in my entire life. As a beginning rock climber in those early days, we didn't have the specialty shoes. And in those days, you found a piece of rock and you looked for the path of least resistance. You weren't trying to climb the hardest section of the rock. You were just trying to climb the rock. And because of that, I was primarily what you would call a power climber. And by power climber, that means it didn't require any skill or finesse. It was just brute strength. Uh, if that's what it required, I'd have a pretty good day. Basically, power climbing is using your body to create opposing push-pull forces. Like if you're getting an inside corner, or you have to do a lie back where you hold your hands under a rock and you push your feet against the face of the cliff the rock is against, and you push pull. You can do chimneys where you put your back against the wall and your feet against the wall. A thing called stemming, where the right hand and the right foot are on one wall, and the left hand, the left foot on the other wall. Or in the case of like a vertical crack system, I do a thing that would be called a Gaston. Now, sometimes when you climb in a crack, you stack your hands and your feet. You wiggle your feet in, you wiggle your hand in, and you make slow upward progress. Well, I like to take my arms and put them out like you would, making the letter T, not singing YMCA, but YMTA. And then you bend your right arm and you put your right hand in the crack. And then you bend your left arm and you put it in the crack so that your knuckles are facing your face and your hands are facing each other. And then you pull sideways. And as you pull sideways, you kind of do a pull up or you push with your feet and you go up like you're basically trying to rip the rock apart. That's called a Gaston. Now, moves like that, those kind of power moves, those were my jam. I could do that. Now, as I continued to climb, I eventually went to some classes and climbed with some guides and did some different things. And I acquired some face climbing skills. But those face climbing skills were never my forte. Now, I have to be honest, lack of height and lack of skill are compounding factors for each other. And the only reason I say that is because I used to use my lack of height as an excuse until I read about Lynn Hill. Now, Lynn Hill was a climber when I first started learning to climb, and she was a gymnast. She stood a powerful 5'2" tall, and she was the first person, not the first female, but the first person, the first human, the first thing walking around bipedally on the planet to free climb the nose of El Capitan. Now, a free climb simply means you climb a section of rock and you don't use the rope as an assistance. The rope is only there to catch you. That's not the same as free soloing. Free soloists don't use ropes at all. But Lynn Hill, this tiny little female, climbed the nose of El Cap and was the first person in the history of humankind to ever do it. And this was an event that changed the perception of what was possible. She was also the first female to red point. That means to climb from the bottom to the top of a route without any falls at all. She's the first female to ever red point a 512. She did that in 1979. She would go on to red point a 513 and a 514. At the time, the most difficult climb in the world was a 14. We've now since had guys climb things that they're calling 515s. She has two very famous quotes. One quote was, "You do not fight that which is your partner, you dance with it." And she never considered being at battle with the rock. She always considered the rock being her partner, and she was doing this intricate dance with it. The other quote was, "The big lesson for me was to realize that despite what appeared to be a limitation due to my small stature, I could create my own method of getting past a difficult section of rock." The most difficult section of rock being called the crux of the problem, or the problem of the problem. Her lack of skill in her mind meant that she had to use different ways to solve problems that her climbing partner, who was bigger and stronger than her, couldn't do. So where he would move from one move to another move, she would have to find ways to use an intermediate move that the bigger, stronger climber wouldn't even consider as a possibility. And so she went outside the perception of what was possible to do these amazing things. Now my lack of skill meant that my lack of height would often dictate that I couldn't reach the obvious next hold. And my lack of skill meant that I couldn't use what the taller guys missed or passed or wouldn't even use. So I'd get to this spot on a rock and I'd be stuck. Not being a competitive climber and not really caring about good form, I would mix aid climbing with free climbing just to enjoy a day on the stone, and not let one move or one section ruin my adventure. We often would, hang rope ladders down or put a piece of gear in and pull off of that gear. We'd do things to get past difficult sections of rock just so we didn't have to climb up to the crux. And if we couldn't get past it, we just had to stop. I learned to use my rope in my favor when I was climbing trees. I'd set up a 2-to-1 mechanical advantage and walk up the side of a tree. I used the same system when I was sneaking out of my dorm room after curfew, and my 2-to-1 rope system would allow me to walk up walls after curfew. Rock climbing in the field, the problem I offered and encountered was that these next hole, the next positive piece of rock would be out of reach. And when a hold is out of reach, the popular thing to do as a rock climber is to lunge for it. And basically, lunging is a dynamic move where one leaves the nestling embrace of the rock, as you say, and would lunge out into space and enter into the embrace of gravity. You leap upward to gain the next access point. And needless to say, I'm not that much of a jumper. I'm not at all any kind of a gymnast. And so jumping and missing and falling basically are the same thing. The only difference is when you lunge for something, there's that teeny tiny microscopic small hope that this time I might actually get it. The frustration of falling and failing and encountering the same problem in the same place every time led to the invention of the Lunge O Matic. Mr. Wile E. Coyote would be proud. Now, the Lunge O Matic only works in a top rope system. You have to have the rope attached to you, and the rope has to run upward away from you and through some kind of a pivot point, through some kind of an anchor, and then it goes back down to the guy who's your belayer. Now, what you do is you start at your harness and you reach up, a little bit past your shoulders, and you put a friction knot on your rope. The friction hitch is a hitch that has the ability to slide up the rope, but if you put pressure on the loop, it won't slide down. It becomes a friction hitch. Well, I would take a friction hitch and put it on my rope between me and the anchor point, usually about the height of my shoulders away from my harness. And then I would connect to my harness and to the friction hitch some kind of elastic band, maybe some kind of an exercise band, maybe some series of bungee cords, or maybe even one big, huge bungee cord. And then you get to the problem area. You get to the area that you can't get past. And then you push the friction hitch up as high as you can push it, and you set it. And then you ask the guy who is your safety guy to pull down on the rope. And as he pulls down on his section of rope, it creates tension in those bungee cords. And basically you have this potential energy. And it's essentially like using a pull-up band, a pull-up assist band when you do pull-ups. And so now you're able to grab rocks that you normally couldn't do a pull-up on, or you couldn't normally get enough friction against. You now essentially weigh less because the bungee cords are assisting you with your pull, or when you decide to leap for it, the bungee cord actually pulls you into space, and you lunge by means of this bungee catapult toward your next hold. Yeah, it's cheating, and you don't get credit for first ascents. You wouldn't get a credit for a red point. And in the strictest sense of the word, in the real climbing world, if you don't climb something by leading it, you didn't actually climb it anyway. Top roping is considered warm-up laps. It's considered practice. It's considered, doing the rehearsal. And that's the consensus of most elite climbers. I consider that to be a little snobby, but I felt that way about bolted climbs for a long, long time. Anyway, but what does happen when you use the Lunge O Matic, when you employ the Lunge O Matic, you get past a spot where you've always been stuck, and then you get to move forward. You get to climb in an area you've never been able to access before. You get to climb in some new territory. And in most cases, once you pass the crux of the climbing is actually easier and more enjoyable because the crux is the hardest move on the route. You see, the route gets its difficulty rating from the crux. The whole wall basically gets looked at and labeled based on that one section. You might have a super easy section of wall, a series of 5-6 moves, and it runs into a 5-13 crux. Then that wall is considered a 5-13. And most normal humans don't climb at that level. But what the wall is like before that one problem and what the wall is like after that one problem is vastly different. You see, you can climb a super easy wall that has one really, really hard problem on it, and the whole wall gets looked at as that's a hard wall, that's a hard climb. Once you get past that difficult part, a lot of the climbs really, really ease up, and they've got big positive handholds and places for both hands and both feet. But most people never get to experience that last part of the climb if they don't get past the crux. In the old days, when people would just, find a section of rock and decide, hey, nobody's ever climbed this section of rock, they would just go and rehearse. They would rappel down to the most difficult move on the project, and instead of climbing from the bottom to the top, they would rappel from the top to that point and just hang there. They called it hang dogging. You'd hang there all afternoon and just rehearse trying to move through this one section. And very many times, being tied off and hanging in this one spot, a climber would rehearse the move, and in doing so would discover there's a different way to do this than what I've been trying to do all along. Well, the Lunge O Matic allowed us to do the same thing. The Lunge O Matic allowed us to move past the problem, but we could move past the problem without hanging out at the problem time and time and time again. We didn't avoid the problem. We just got past it without actually solving it. Didn't actually physically ourselves with our own power climb it, but with some assistance, we climbed past it. And now the same thing really happens when you're using a climbing guide. If a climber is following a guide up a certain section of wall and they get stuck, the climbing guide is trained to create a mechanical advantage using a Z-rig and just basically help the climber get past the problem. That's what the Lunge O Matic did for us. Now, the Lunge O Matic did not gain popularity. It did not get patented. It has never been reproduced by anyone else. You can't buy it on Amazon, and it is banned from competitions. But for a short, stocky power climber, it turned days that would have been frustrating into fun. It took me past the stopping point and allowed me to go just a little bit further. It allowed me to do some things that I'd never been able to do without it. And in the spirit of true climbing and as a sport, I get it. I get the best practice, purest thinking, poor form, yada, yada, yada. But using the Lunge O Matic allowed me to just look at a problem and decide I don't have to stop at the problem. I don't have to be stuck there. I can get past it. And the only reason I'm even thinking about the old Lunge O Matic anymore is because I heard a quote recently. A guy and I were talking at my office, and he said he heard a quote and he wanted to share it with me. And the quote was, if you want something you've never had, you must be willing to do something you've never done. I would add to that. I would modify it. If you want something you've never had, you must be willing to do something you've never done, or you must be willing to do something in a way you've never done it. Something is impossible only because we limit our idea of possible to what has already been done. Something is impossible if we only limit our ideas to what is possible of the way we've always done it. Read an article by Lynn Hill about freeing the nose of El Capitan and see how she solved the problem that no one else could solve when free climbing that monster. If we live in the limits of what has only been done or the way it's always been done, then there is no room for progress. There's no room for innovation. There's no room for invention. And there's absolutely no room for growth. Would you like to have a different relationship with your spouse? Speak different, act different, listen different, respond differently to hurt, respond differently to disappointment, respond differently to frustration, imperfection, a different point of view. And you can apply the same thing. Would you like to have a different relationship with church or your job or your children, with your sport, with your hobby, with your money, with politics? Do something in a way you've never done it before. Do something you've never done before. It might surprise you what would happen if you stopped, if you listened, if you apologized, if you admitted you're wrong. Lunge O Matics aside, I'm not talking about cutting corners. I'm not talking about cheating. I'm not talking about being disingenuous. I'm not talking about manipulating the system and gaming or doing an end around, but simply doing things in ways that make them not just easier, but more successful. Quit doing things with the idea of winning or losing and just ask, are we making things better? Am I a person who won't let things go? Am I a person who won't admit they're wrong? Am I a person who has to win every time? Am I a person who has to have the last word? Am I the person who waits for the other person to give in? Am I the person who keeps score of hurts and losses and failures and waiting for other people? Quit giving other people the ability to control your future and do something you've never done before in a way you've never done it before. I wonder, what would happen if we took those things that frustrate us? I wonder what would happen if we took those situations where we seem to always get stuck and can't get past. I wonder what would happen if we chose to do this radical, counterintuitive approach to this problem. If I did something I've never done in a way I've never done it. I wonder if doing that or simply not doing what I've always done. I wonder if that would help me get past this problem. Past the problem. Past that point and enter into new territory and new adventure. And oddly enough, once you get past that problem, the climbing, it's usually easier. Using the tool of shortwave radio, World Christian Broadcasting literally covers the world every day with the gospel. They use 2 large curtain antennas. One is located in Anchor Point, Alaska, and the other in Madagascar. They send out messages that are recorded at their international home in Franklin, Tennessee. They make available 40 hours of broadcast every day. The broadcasts are made in English, Chinese, Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, Korean, English for Africa, and Arabic. They would love for your group to visit them. You can bring your ladies group, your youth group, or your men's group. Just give them a call at 615-371-8707. 615-371-8707, or you can go to worldchristian.org, find the donate here button, and make a financial contribution to support this work that literally covers the world every day with the gospel. World Christian Broadcasting, in cooperation with Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure.